this whole thing full circle.
You did have cookies in your contract, which was awesome.
Yeah. I told that story to someone recently, actually. I can't remember who it was.
Oh, and Bertie says hi as well from Paris.
Oh,
I work with her. She's product manager at Normal.
She's amazing.
Oh, wait. Ryan says we're live.
Question. Would you build a website?
Okay. I think we are live. If
Yes.
Our trusty producer and creative director, Mr. Ryan Thrower, is to be believed. Good evening, everyone. Happy Monday morning or Monday evening trail running, Monday night trail running. We may get a cease and desist from Monday Night Football, but that was all Ryan Thrower's doing. So thanks so much to Ryan for letting us know we're live. And thanks so much to everybody who's watching us live. We are going to be having a fun, industry-oriented conversation this evening. Joining me as usual is Corinne Malcolm, the returning champion, who is our MVP here. And then joining us from Utah, I believe, is Mike Ambrose. Mike, welcome to the conversation. How are you, buddy?
Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we were just saying everybody knows Corinne at this point. So maybe provide the quick 60-second introduction into who you are, your experience in the industry, and what you're up to now at Normal.
Gosh, I don't know if 60 seconds is too long or too short, but so right now I'm the country manager for the United States for Normal. So if you're not familiar with Normal, it's a new startup brand by Killian Jornet and Camper. So my job is to basically build Normal here in the US and bring it to life. So hopefully, inspire all runners to try a pair and get out there. But I've been in the industry for about 8 years, a lot of different roles from, being a rep, brand manager, product line manager to now country manager. So I've had a lot of really, really progressive success, and I'm super grateful for that. And yeah, happy to be here to talk about the industry.
Maybe talk about some of the products you worked at Solomon, at the previous brand that you were integral in working at over in Annecy, and some of the products that people are familiar with.
Yeah, so basically, I worked on my first big shoe that I worked on was the Ultra Glide. So I think a lot of your listeners and viewers might have tried it. So that was probably my first baby, as we call it in the industry. But I've worked on almost everything in trail running that Solomon's put out. That's still coming out now, actually. So even like Sense Ride 5 that just came out, Ultra Glide 2, Pulsar Trail Pro 2, and actually everything until 2024 I've had a hand on. So yeah, really amazing time with the team over in NC. Really, really great group of people and such a product-driven company. So yeah, it was sad to go for sure, but new opportunities come up, and happy to take all the learning with me to Normal.
Yeah, very cool to see you land there at Normal. And I want to sort of start our conversation by summarizing some of the moves that were made on the athlete side to start 2023. We'll have Corinne do more of the deep dive, but maybe Mike will let you get us started with the Ali Ostrander news. You and I spoke just as that news was coming out on the telephone, and she was just a guest here on the podcast. And I think this is a great launching off point to just talk about some of the athlete moves that were made, some of the sort of like recruitment process. I don't think you were necessarily really involved in bringing Ali on with Normal, but maybe let's just start there. What does it mean for a brand like yours, an upstart trail specific brand, to bring on someone like Ali Ostrander, who has so much talent, so much pedigree, and is also so interesting outside of running?
Well, I think I'm just like Ali, and I'll just use the word excited because I think that was the hot word, the drinking game word that you guys shared on the podcast. But super excited. I mean, she's an amazing talent, amazing person, and there's not really a better person to bring on to represent the brand and our values, and just to give her a platform to be who she is and race to her fullest potential. So I was really excited to hear that she was coming on when I joined Normal, and yeah, I can't wait to see how the future unfolds for her.
Corinne Malcolm.
Oh boy. Hey.
I don't know if there's anything you want to add to Ali, but the thing that I really wanted to sort of throw to you first is just sort of some of the athlete free agency. So maybe give us the top line on Ali, and I'll share my screen for the free agency board here.
I mean, so I actually heard ahead of the announcement, not that she was going to Normal, but that she was going to be on the Golden Trail series, because back end of the Golden Trail series, every athlete racing on that circuit actually gets like a breakdown of who's going where and funds allocated to those athletes. And so I happened to be at training camp with new teammate Danny Moreno, great free agent move over to Adidas Terrex. And she was like, you'll never guess who's on the Golden Trail series list this year. And I was like, I'm completely blown away, very, very excited. And so when the Normal news came out, I was like, It all makes sense. This is big. I think ever since seeing her run Mount Marathon as like a just graduated senior in high school, to watching all of her success on the track, this feels really full circle for her. And I'm so excited to see her, step into the mountains again and step up in distance, which will be interesting. But I mean, I think it's going to be really amazing to watch.
Yes. So yeah, it's great to have Allie in the sport. And just so our viewers know, I've just pulled up my screen here, which is an amazing new feature of the fantasy.freetrail.com website that is all thanks to Travis Longcar. This is the 2023 free agency board, the athlete movement that happened in trail running. So Corinne, I want you to give us a little bit of a deep dive here, or at least start with some of the biggest stories in terms of athletes leaving brands, joining new brands, and what it generally means.
Totally. So I don't think right at the very top of your screen there is Allie Mack, who had probably one of the best sub ultra like seasons of anyone in the world, maybe next to Ninke. And I don't think anyone expected her to leave On. That seemed like a really solid place for her and a really solid team. So I think her Hoka news felt really, really huge. I think the craft news from like Arlen Glick and then Tim Tollefson, and who's not on this list actually is Mimi. Oh no, there she is. Mimi Kotka's on this list as well. Like those 3 moves to craft felt like craft was really rounding out their team, which felt like something that I was waiting to see from craft, from Nike, from Saucony, who's surprisingly not on this list actually of not taking on new athletes. So big moves by Kraft there. I felt like we had some exodus from places like Solomon, from places like Hoka, both nationally here in the US and internationally. I think some of the, one of the surprises actually was a Solomon to Hoka athlete in Judith Wider, a orienteer by training, or I guess by kind of official trade, has had a ton of success on the Golden Trail series. I thought that was an interesting move to Hoka. What else was kind of some of the big stuff? Obviously, Danny Moreno coming to Adidas Terrex. There's one more runner coming to Adidas that I don't know has been announced yet, internationally, which will be exciting when that news does come out. And then I think obviously the Camille Herron long tease, right? Yep. The long tease of where was she going, leaving Hoka. We now know that is Lululemon, and that deal is predominantly based on apparel and community. They're all deemed kind of ambassadors to the sport. But can run in whatever she wants to footwear wise, which I think is super, super interesting. And I do know that there are more athletes yet to announce, from brands like Adidas Terrex, from brands like Lululemon. So there might be some movement. Even we just had movement on the North Face side with Tara Fraga of Seattle announcing her move to the North Face. The North Face's biggest announcement this year was actually, I think, the launching of their athlete development program. So Rod Farvard, who's on this list as signing with the North Face, he's part of that first ever 17-person athlete development program that is skiing, climbing, and trail running. So they brought in athletes from underrepresented populations and athletes who are kind of on the cusp as well. So Laura Cortez is on that list from the US. Helen Mino Faulkner is on that list from the US. So there's some cool like new athletes who maybe haven't had that shine or support, getting support via the North Face this year. And then 2 people who should not be missed also on this list that I'm still staring at kind of out of the corner of my eye is Sarah Alonso and Stian Angermund moving from Solomon to Asics. I think that was a huge move by Asics. I think that's a huge win for them, grabbing Sarah Alonso. And I think while Stian kind of had a quiet season until Worlds last year, he's obviously abundantly talented. And so excited to see, if they're going to increase that stable or not over the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, I want to talk about ASICS here in a second, but let's linger on the Camille Herron Lululemon thing, because I think that's the biggest story of contract season this year. Mike, Lululemon is a $7.5 billion a year juggernaut of a business. And as Corinne said, this is going to be an apparel only type situation. They may or may not be trying to develop trail footwear that might be suitable for an athlete of Camille Herron's capabilities. But just for our listeners' perspective, that's about 3.5 times the size of the North Face. Do you have any comments or any top line takeaways from the fact that Lululemon has now entered the trail and ultramarathon game?
I think it makes sense, from their perspective. I mean, they're kind of already in it, with outfitting runners, for sure. Like, you see it everywhere. It transcends, every version of running and all types of active, lifestyles. So it makes a lot of sense. I know they are developing footwear and building footwear. So actually I have a good friend who's working on the team there with Lulu. So they're definitely trying to get into footwear. I'm not sure, if highly performance footwear and trail footwear is going to be a focus, but I mean, it's just like all these other brands, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. It's just getting into trail running. It's an opportunity that everyone wants.
Yeah.
And they've had track and field athletes. This is not the first news of them moving more into like the running performance space. They've got Nikki Hiltz and Colleen Quigley, along with a couple other athletes that came on in the last 2 years. So I think that, like, to me, it's not a big surprise. And as Mike mentioned, they've been outfitting people for forever. I mean, they are the apparel outfitter for the Canadian national teams for the Olympic Games. I've worked in the white space lab in Kitsilano at Lululemon headquarters during my graduate degree, working on like apparel science. Like, for being a quote unquote like yoga and like athleisure wear company, like, I've been in their climactic chamber. I've run metabolic tests in their lab. I've seen their wet lab where they're like trying to grow mold on pieces of like athletic material. So, for being a yoga juggernaut, they have all of the makings of putting out really high level performance wear. So I think that's super, super cool.
I mean, for me, it's just obvious now that nobody can ignore us, right? When brands like Lululemon and Nike and Adidas are recognizing trail and putting forth concerted investment into developing new product and signing high-level athletes like Camille, it's a really exciting time. Corinne, Mike put on our shared doc a question that I think would be good for you. You mentioned Danny Moreno signing to your team, the Adidas Terrex team, and Mike was sort of talking about sort of like the scouting process of athletes, sort of what athletes consider in aligning themselves with brands and sort of what brands are looking for in a 21st century athlete. You can use Danny as an example if you want to, or if you just want to tackle that question in any other way that you see fit. I think the audience would really like it.
Yeah. And then we can tee Mike up, because Mike, while he's worked on a lot of products, he's also been the person behind the scenes IDing athletes. That's how I ended up at Salomon back in the day. It's how someone like Courtney started at Salomon back in the day. So clearly has an eye for potential.
Really? Mike,
Yeah.
you were the one who scouted Courtney?
Well, it was Adam Chase and I together at the time who worked on, and I think we had a list of athletes that we wanted to bring on the team. I think the end of 2016. And I still brag about this class. It was Corinne, Addie Bracy, and Courtney came in on the same time. And it's still like, I just brag about all the time. I call it the Courtney, Addie, and Corinne class. But yeah, that was 2016, 2017. I was brand manager and stuff. So both, not to take anything.
He's seen it. He's seen it from both sides though, which I think is I think that's a really interesting perspective to bring into like the product development and like full team holistic approach side. But yeah, the scouting of athletes is interesting. I feel like as a professional athlete and as someone involved with a big professional team, I also spend a lot of my time like talking to athletes that are looking to move brands. I joke that I'm kind of like I feel like I'm a fixer in the sport a little bit. Like, while I have my own contract, I spend a lot of time helping athletes communicate with our brand manager, with other brand managers, with like helping people solve the puzzles of like, hey, we need another woman. Like, who should we approach? Or, hey, we're looking for someone in this space. Who should we approach? Like, I spend a lot of time navigating that space as an unofficial agent of sorts. But I do think that it's interesting, because if I look at teams and I look at teams like Adidas who are approaching it really holistically, like, yes, they're kind of looking to fill certain categories as far as like, ooh, we've got women and men racing in the ultra endurance. And then we've got this kind of middle ultra space. And then we've got this, short distance ultra and sub ultra spaces, and making sure they're like ticking the boxes there. And performance is important, but at the same time, like, our team manager has come back to us every single time and said, hey, we're looking at so-and-so. Like, what do you think? What do you know? Like, have you talked to them? Do you like, is this a person that you would want to like bring into the fold? And there are definitely probably downsides of that, as in like, friends hiring friends, so to speak, but also like they're looking for team cohesion, and they're looking for kind of the weighing the pros and cons of decisions, and asking the athletes about that, I think, while creates a barrier at times, also creates this like kind of like a more multifactorial approach to like bringing an athlete onto the team. And it's not, I mean, the reason I got the call from Rob to even chat about Adidas was because I had done biathlon, like, and I was currently coaching junior skiers, and like that was engaging enough for him to want to have a conversation with me. It wasn't like my ultra performances that I was like trying to grow. It was the like, oh, she does this and this and this. Like, that's really interesting. We don't have someone doing those things. Like, this is her story. And I think that that is part of that scouting process, both for like young athletes and then athletes that are looking to move potentially between brands, which is like a whole nother puzzle of rebranding people.
It's just like any other career, right? The endorsement of your
peers
and your peers is really valuable. I recall when I signed with the North Face many years ago, it was on the recommendation of Mike Foote, Mike Wolf, Tim Olson, Stephanie Howe. And so just like anything else, it pays to cultivate, maintain great relationships, and make sure that you have a good reputation in your community. I want to come back and talk more about Adidas here in a little bit, but going back to what we were talking about with ASICS, one of the themes of our conversation here tonight is going to be between performance brands and outdoor brands, right? And Mike, maybe this is a great space for you. I pulled a quote out of an article that I'll reference here a number of times. It was published last week in the Business of Fashion that identified trail running as activewear's next big category. And there was a quote in the article that says, for Japanese sportswear giant ASICS, trail accounts for one of its fastest growing performance categories in terms of sales, with an average annual growth rate of 10% over the past 3 years. So Mike, with that being said, you know, from your perspective as a brand guy, when performance is sort of like in the DNA, like a brand like ASICS, how hard is it to then translate that authentically into more outdoor oriented product, footwear, apparel, et cetera?
I think if it's rooted in authenticity, like you said, and that performance, it's really not that hard to do it. I think it's hard when you don't come from a place of authenticity. If you're trying to just fake it or just play in that space because it just is an opportunity. But when you come at it with a really rich history of performance and technology, that kind of just really plays into other arenas as well, and especially into outdoor and into lifestyle as well, because there's so much time and craftsmanship put into these products for a different use, but it translates, that storytelling and the aesthetic and the tech, putting it all together really brings something special to life into these other arenas, especially when there's new consumers entering the market, people from other backgrounds, like now trail runners weren't just, trail running is really cool too, in a sense, because it's always attracted people from other backgrounds. It's not just, collegiate runners that are looking to do something else, right? You get bartenders, you get musicians, you get just people who fall into it late in life. So I think, when you have that really core authenticity, it really yields itself to being successful in other areas.
It's also protective in the market right now, I want to say, just like looking at how like ad dollars are being spent and marketing revenue and like where marketing freezes are happening. I mean, we're seeing marketing dollars be cut in like the ski sector, and in the cycling sector is actually having some big issues, whereas trail and running hasn't had the same impact with marketing dollars, in part because it is a little bit inflation protected, a little bit like it doesn't have such like the financial component of it for that bartender falling into it later in life, for that, that individual who's in their 40s, who's picking up their first pair of running shoes. It's not quite the same barrier to entry as owning a gravel bike or a Icon pass to go skiing. So I think that we are surviving better in like a recession. Potentially.
There will eventually be an exhalation from the market, just like there has been a number of times across every other sport. We are just still very much in this maturation phase where now all these brands are flooding into the sport. And of course, there will be a correction to that overcorrection at some point. But right now, we will take it while it's here. Corinne, piggybacking off this like subject of authenticity and performance brands versus outdoor brands, it's another great opportunity to talk about Adidas, one of the most iconic performance brands in the history of the world. But they seem to have been able to really cultivate that authenticity in the outdoor space in particular. And part of that is maybe because of the Terrex sub-brands. So maybe if you could explain a little bit how Terrex and the mother Adidas brand fit together.
How they actually fit together.
Yeah.
They do, and yet they're kind of separate entities. Like they function separately. They have the protection of being part of a bigger brand, but they otherwise operationally work, particularly like on the like European, like the global headquarters side. They operate separately. In North America, like they're all under one hub in Portland together. Like people who are working on more broad Adidas stuff and the Terrex side are all hubbed together, which is interesting when it comes to like a communications standpoint. But globally, Terrex gets to operate under its own like umbrella, its own designers, its own. I mean, it does have problems though, because it's like, oh, we want to like make this shoe, just put some trail tread on it. Well, they have to kind of oftentimes reinvent the wheel to make that happen because they do operate separately in that regard. But the history with Adidas is that they've always kind of had their foot in the outdoor space. I think the lines that you think of like Adidas Originals and all that kind of stuff, like that was almost secondary to like their historical implications of operating more in that traditional outdoor space alongside skiing and hiking. That is like an ethos at their core. I think that they like have come back to, as opposed to like have had to reinvent.
Mike, anything you want to add there about Adidas in particular, or this outdoor meets performance conversation?
I think it's going to be interesting, especially seeing trail running as a sport evolve. Especially the last year, seeing a lot of these records, that are constantly being broken. And some of the most fabled records in our sport have been going down. And I think bringing the performance brand mentality, like the Nike or Adidas, to trail running to see how does that play in outdoor, in regards to maybe like a super shoe, or even just like funding some crazy ideas and some crazy projects as well, because Nike's I think 37 billion, right? I mean, Lululemon's 7 billion. We're talking 4 or 5 times the size in billions. It's not just like dollars and thousands. So I think we're just seeing more technology, more support, marketing, more crazy stuff coming. I think we're not even touching the surface yet to what's going to come. So
and from from the athlete's standpoint, like for companies like Nike or Adidas, it does allow athletes to kind of double dip. I don't know that any of my Adidas teammates in the US are doing this, but I know internationally where they might be supported by Adidas Spain or as well as Adidas Terrex Global. And so they're tying into Adidas, like Adidas Women and that kind of thing. So there's kind of some secondary deals where it's you're technically in one stable, but you're still under the same house. And so it allows them to work on campaigns and work within the marketing house that's much larger than just like the Terrex side or the Nike Trail side of a company.
Yeah. So another theme I want to talk about tonight is sort of the incumbents versus the disruptors in the business right now. And I think, Mike, you guys at Normal very much represent the disruptive category here as a small startup with a lot of upside. You, of course, also have a lot of experience working at Salomon, one of the most iconic outdoor brands ever. Can you just explain maybe the difference between working within that large organization at Salomon with so much tradition versus working in a startup environment like Normal?
Yeah, it's completely different. Salomon's a super powerful, freight train that's just going, super fast with a lot of momentum, a lot of strength, but maybe not always the most agile. And in a lot of ways, I mean, it's a company that's got, they put out great products, great content, no doubt one of the greatest brands in the industry, but not super flexible and agile. And with the startup like at Normal, where we don't have as much momentum, we have a lot of hype, but we're almost like a light rail. We can be quick and agile and change direction real quickly and get feedback from the market and from the user and apply that to products or to campaigns and stuff like that. So I think that's probably the best analogy. And at the same time too, we're challengers. We know what we're going into. We know the space. We know that we know the great products that are out there. It's not like we're going to a market that there isn't great products or great athletes doing. It's a really, really competitive space. But we're just hoping that we can improve the runner's experience and bring a new innovative concept to the market. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge, but Super excited for it.
You mentioned the content piece, and it makes me want to ask about Solomon running TV, because that was sort of in the era that you were working at the brand 7-8 years ago. And it was so influential in the sport at that time and really did help to accelerate a lot of this growth that we've been experiencing. I know at Normal now, you guys are emphasizing storytelling in a big way, obviously identifying somebody like Ali Ostrander as an extension of that, as somebody who's a storyteller and a content creator herself. Do you want to talk at all about maybe the marketing and how things have changed and how owning your own story is important for brands in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think it's important. There's so much content out there, so much media. You can go everywhere into any brand for inspiration. But I think, by telling your story, making it unique and being true to yourself is just the best way to communicate. And the reality is, users and consumers of media are going to see through it, right? They're either going to connect to it or not. And I think one of the great things about trail running is it's really brought a lot of content to the space, but it's not all engaging. It's not all inspiring. So I think, one thing at Normal we're going to try to do is really, I don't know, just kind of go back to what connects runners to each other and to the environment, to the sport, and, bring in the athletes and the stories that just provide that, inspiration and just those feel good, feels that you used to get from the trail dog from Solomon TV, for example, or Bill Duper, the story about Bill and all
Iconic pieces of trail running content. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, what those were so great because they just made you feel really good and they made you want to go out there and put on a pair of shoes. I think it was a Solomon TV episode that I watched that made me go out and buy my first pair of Solomons in 2012. And then 10 years later, here I am, working with one of my heroes, in Kylian Jornet, from Solomon, from a different TV episode. So I think it's just going to be really important to be authentic and be true to the sport and true to the runner. And I think that's just the best way you can do it, in 2023 and going forward.
Yeah. Transitioning from a small independent brand in Normal, Corinne, you put something on our shared doc that I think is really interesting and relevant to our conversation here. Two brands that don't necessarily have a big trail presence, but who are very much, proud, established running industry apparel brands, that being Janji and Oiselle merging. I think that news was announced last week or the week before. What do you want to say about that merger, Corinne?
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting. And at first I was like super confused as to like how they were going to be merging. Like I love Janji's, like their materials and their patterns and like are so cool and interesting. And Oiselle is this like staple in like the women's running community. They're here in Seattle where I live. I've had a lot of talks with Sarah and Sally over the years about various things. So I think that like they both have really strong communities that support them, but they're both relatively small businesses. When we've been talking about companies that are worth billions and billions of dollars, that is not, the Janji and Oiselle company. And to see them have like formed their own like legal merger was, I thought, one, very curious, and two, very exciting, because it does mean that they're being progressive and forward thinking in the ways that they want to stay autonomous. And a lot of companies, right, they want to get bought out. Like getting bought out is a dream, because then it's like, okay, like my money is safe now. I like, as a founder, I can get out, or I'm not out, but I like my money is safe. So I know that is a goal of a lot of companies, is to eventually get bought. It's a big payday for everyone. But I think this merger symbolizes them not wanting that and to want to keep their autonomy, but to be able to utilize each other's resources that they wouldn't have access to as these two independent things. So I thought it was one, very creative. There are probably examples of it in other businesses, but for me in this running space with these like medium-sized running brands, they're obviously much smaller brands and much, much larger brands, but to see these two medium groups not get bought out by like an Amer Sport or a VF, where, that like those are, it's beneficial, but has hiccups and hangups, I thought was really cool. So I'm very excited to see what it allows them to do and what was limiting to them before.
Yeah. Mike, anything you want to say on this merger, like what the benefit is to staying independent and sort of combining forces? Is it like shared resources, shared capital, shared employees, maybe? What's the benefit here, do you think?
I think shared resources, shared talent. Any business as it scales, it needs more resources. And I think when you combine forces like that, it definitely takes the edge off of some of those growing pains and trying to scale when you can kind of, tag team, distribution or supply chain and maybe even factories. I'm not sure all the details of it, but maybe they can, source stuff together. From working for a really big company, Amer Sports, with Salomon, the plus of it is that it's a big company, ton of resources. You can do a lot. You have a lot, and you have a lot of great talent that's there, and you can hire it, and you can distribute all over the world, and you can really gain a lot of growth pretty quickly. But like I was saying earlier, you're not super agile, and then you also have a lot of financial targets you have to answer to, and profitability becomes what you talk about every day for sure. Like at normal, for sure, we care about profitability, but it is smaller now. I mean, of course, we're a business, but we could just be more flexible, more agile, and kind of take our time to do things. We can be a little bit more patient when it comes to the financial side.
Yeah.
There's a really great question in the chat that I want to highlight.
Is it Cody's?
Well, Cody's is great, but Riley Tiff's is also really interesting and kind of merges into like that Gorp core like side of the sport a little bit. So we could hit on that. The question was, do you see any tension between trail running as activewear category and trail running as a sport, i.e. growth in one aspect is not mutually exclusive with growth in the other? Just kind of curious about that. Like, I thought that's like, I think a very astute question.
Let's save that one for the end,
okay,
because that sort of comes to sort of like the culture meets sport conversation, which
Riley, we'll get to you.
We'll get to you, Riley. But first, I think Cody's question is really great too. And what he's asking, and I think this is great for you, Mike and Corinne, feel free to chime in, is sort of like, how do brands evaluate return on investment with athletes? It's obviously not necessarily easy to measure the return that you're getting off somebody like Ali Ostrander. Killian is maybe a different story as a co-founder of the brand, but anything you can share about how you evaluate those investments and how you make sure that it is in the best interest of both the brand and the athlete to stick together?
Yeah, I mean, if just for pure metrics and numbers, we can definitely look at likes, shares, impressions, different ways that athletes that you've invested in are having impact, to consumers. You can look at anything, social media to print, and kind of go off of that visibility, on a UTMB podium or a live stream or something like that. But I think what's important is also just kind of doing what's right for the sport and for the athlete and for the community. There's not really a metric to define that. What is sports marketing? But I think it's just an important way to demonstrate your commitment to progressing the sport and certain athletes, and also giving them ways to achieve their goals and dreams and to inspire others. I think there's it is really hard to say. Every time I worked in a brand management role, this was always something that came up, and you tend to cherry pick likes and shares and stuff like that. But the one thing that I used to always share when it was time to summarize the athletes was I have a picture of Courtney at some local Aeroviper race, and these three little girls are coming up to her, and Courtney's bent over and just like just talking to these three girls, and they're like, we want to be like you when we get older. My mom loves you. And I mean, that's the important stuff. And that's what's happening. And you have the right athletes, and you know that they're good fit for the brand, they're good fit for the community. It'll pay for itself. You just have to have most faith in it. But the business guy in me is going to say, for sure there's metrics we look at, but I think it's the intangible stuff too that is happening. And that picture of Courtney to me will always kind of cherish sports marketing in my heart, because that's why you do it. And so metrics are tough. It's do athletes sell more shoes? It's hard to say.
Corinne, maybe this
probably minutely, right? It's like,
yeah.
I was going to say to that point where it's like, particularly with brands that might not be in like your local running store, or I mean, REI is great. REI brought on like 40 brands or something. So it's a lot easier to try on stuff locally for folks, but it's like, Allie will sell shoes because someone might need a trail runner and they'll be like, oh, Allie's running in this. Or like, I've got friends who are now running in like our Speed Ultra because they know that I run in it, et cetera. And like, they wouldn't have tried it before because they wouldn't have been able to try it on. And I think, brands like Puma who want to come into the space, that's like their biggest issue, their biggest hurdles, that like they're not in brick and mortar stores, like they're predominantly online, and it's hard to try a shoe just by ordering it and taking the leap. So I think that's where the athletes do play a role, is like, oh, this shoe works for them. Like, oh, I might try it now. And it's mostly because like I know the person, I trust the person versus them being the best in the world.
It makes me want to talk a little bit about this team concept too. And what I'm thinking about is back when you and I were together at Black Canyon, Corinne, and just being so impressed with how Adidas travels. And I'm always, when I'm at these events, constantly downloading who's wearing what and how brands are activating. And I think Terrex is really like dominating the physical presence at a lot of these high profile races. And there's always that palpable sense of support and friendship and team among your group. Maybe if you could talk about how that feeling of team is engendered from a brand level and how that trickles through the athlete ranks.
Yeah, it's kind of the guerrilla marketing format, right? Where we just like appear places. But no, so I think that what you're speaking to is like we've been very I guess like calculated in a team calendar. And you're not required to go to every team event. You're not required to have a team event be your feature event for the year, but it's encouraged to try to be at some of these things. And truthfully, like you want to be there. Like you definitely get some FOMO when you're not. Like it definitely kind of sucks. But I do think that like it's palpable. Like people remember us, and this is why we've got a team kit and a team color for the year, and we show up in the right color. And I thought that was super stupid initially. Like I was like, I showed up with the wrong stuff because I like purple, but that year's color was blue or neon green or whatever, and I was put in a different jacket. But like the images you get from that are really strong when you see this like unified group of human beings. And like people remember like 30 of us chasing Emily Hawgood like the 2 kilometers into Chamonix when she was finishing UTMB. She was our last runner out on course. Like we saw her by our Airbnb. We chased her like to the next intersection. We chased her to the next intersection. And then there were like 20 of us in our neon green jackets, just like mobbing through, downtown Chamonix to welcome her to the finish. And it's like, I think that probably wasn't her favorite result ever as far as performances go, but like having that team aspect and that team environment like carries you along. I think like it creates memories for us, but it creates like memorable moments in the community more broadly too, which I think is a very effective marketing strategy. And it's also like, I think why I want to be part of the team, and like why someone like Danny wanted to be part of the team, was like that level of support is not a tangible, like this is your retainer and this is your bonus structure. Like there's a different aspect of creating that team environment, which is like probably hard to measure and hard to understand its like full return on investment values.
It also, I think, helps Adidas feel authentic in the outdoor space. And maybe Mike, this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about Normal. And obviously that authenticity needs to also be reflected in the product in order for the company to have a shot at surviving. Of course, Kilian Jornet, as we've mentioned, is one of the founders of the brand. But if you want to provide any visual into how you guys integrate the athletes, the feedback, the general, conversations that you have with the team into the products that you create, and more generally into the philosophy and ethos and feeling of the brand.
Yeah, one thing that's really cool at Normal is, athletes are super involved in all feedback of the product, but also the company too. And to think outside the box, so the double-ended Normal stands for no normal. So basically not doing things in a normal way, thinking outside the box, being creative and being disruptive and innovative at the same time. So, when it comes to potential business models or ways to sell a product or types of products you could sell, it's a full 360 experience the athletes have with the brand, which is super cool. At other brands I've worked, athletes aren't really commenting on what an e-commerce model could look like or ways to win in the community, but really taking all that feedback, and of course on top of I didn't like the way this fit, or this could be more cushion, or this could be softer. So and what's really cool too is not only the athletes, but everyone who works in the company is really, really committed to the company's values. And the big value is sustainability and doing things that are right, now and for the future of our planet. So one aspect of that is durability. So making really, really durable products that should last longer. So you're putting less shoes in landfills and taking a little bit of a different approach. To this point, and I was even part of this, we were making products that had recycled materials or could have been fully recycled. And that's great. But if they only last like 1/3 or 1/4 of the life, you're just putting more shoes into landfills. And a lot of times, if you're making a shoe that's fully recyclable or if it's fully recyclable, it's usually virgin-based petroleum that's going into them. So you're using a lot of new resources to create something that you hopefully will get recycled. So, durability is an interesting thing in our shoes where we don't use a lot of recycled materials, but they last a really long time. And, you don't have to buy 3 shoes, you buy 1 shoe, and they're also incredibly versatile. So, being, and this is the mantra for everyone in the company, and like, we don't have a printer in the office, for example, because we're not going to waste paper, so I think it's everyone in the company sharing the same values and the same goals that really make it special.
Yeah. Awesome. Corinne, is there
That's
anything
so
you want
cool.
to add there? I think the main takeaway for me there is like, the athletes have to embody the values and the mission of the brand too. And that's part of going back to an earlier conversation we were having about how brands identify, scout, and recruit the athletes who end up on their team. Is there does have to be an alignment between the personality and the brand values.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think it's really cool to watch companies like have these ethos. I think all of us, when we like heard that Killian was leaving Solomon, we're like, what is this about? Like, I think there's a question mark of like, is he going to start his own thing? Or is he like going to go play in the mountains in the Himalaya? Like, I think that was kind of the, like, we weren't sure which way that was going to go to see, and knowing how expensive designing and developing and producing like a single size in a single run of shoes is, like, to me, I was like, ooh, like this will be really interesting from a financial perspective. So to see it get off the ground and to see the initial success, to me, is really exciting. I mean, obviously when you have a name like Killian, that goes a long way.
Sure.
But I do think that, knowing how hard it is to make shoes, watching companies try to make running shoes, watching big companies try to make running shoes. I know how hard that is. And so it's been really interesting to see that kind of evolve and watch the team grow. So the ethos mission behind it's all I think it like sings true across a bit.
No doubt. So let's start moving towards this culture conversation, because this will be super fun. Another data point that was articulated in the article that I talked about earlier in our conversation that I put at the top of the chat here was that Xenia had bought a minority position in Norda, a very new upstart Canadian trail-specific footwear brand. So the iconic Italian fashion house Xenia is now buying their way into the trail running market, competing, now against Nike and Adidas and Lululemon and
Gorp Core,
and then North Face, Solomon, and then, Speedland and the other, and Normal, and the other upstarts that are coming into the space now too. So it's really, I think, a fascinating time. Mike, maybe this is a good opportunity. You were mentioning earlier about, Campers roots. I don't know if you want to mention that and the relationship with Normal and how that benefits what you guys are working on, or if you want to comment at all on the Xenia Norda partnership. But I think this is a fun avenue of conversation.
Yeah, I think I saw something in the chat too about Camper and Normal. So Camper is a Spanish shoe company based in Mallorca. So the wonderful trail running paradise, that's Mallorca. That's where they were founded. And basically, in partnership with Killian, Normal was born. So Camper is still heavily involved. We share a lot of the same resources, like I mentioned earlier. One of the major pluses with these mergers, these joint ventures, is just resources. So Camper's been making shoes for a really long time, and has a rich history in shoemaking. So the shoes that you see today from Normal, the reason they were able to be put together so quickly in such a high quality way is there's shoemakers in Mallorca making shoes, and then just throwing a little bit of Killian in there, and you've got some pretty kick-ass trail running shoes. But it's still, it's owned by Camper. They're the majority stakeholder in the company. But so it's just kind of easy way, I guess, to understand it, it's kind of the trail run outdoor performance division of Camper. So yeah, still heavily involved. We share a lot of resources, even on the design development side, lasting, the actual shaping of a shoe. So that's kind of the relationship with Camper, and they've been really supportive and super excited to see where this goes. So and then seeing Xenia get involved with Norda, Norda's such an interesting brand because they came in, like I was saying, like with a really strong performance background. There's a lot of interesting technology. They're using Vibram, and it was a really high performance product, but it also was pretty captivating from a core lifestyle standpoint too. The colorways and the way you could kind of color block it, and it was kind of chunky and big, and the silhouettes were modern. So it really played well in some of those international scenes too, like especially Milan. I think they had a huge presence in Milan, which I think where Zane is from. But it was just kind of rooted in performance, and it looked really cool. And if you go on the website's super cool. The imagery is nice, so it just makes a lot of sense, like we were saying earlier too, with opportunity. Like, let's just go get it.
Define the Gorp core thing for our listeners, because this is a new word in my vocabulary.
Dylan had to Google it yesterday.
Yeah, so I guess if I could just paint you a picture really quick. It'd be like a North Face Nupsy jackets with
Arc'teryx pants.
Arc'teryx pants, maybe Valence Arc'teryx pants, Salomon XT6s, probably a pair of Oakleys now too, because they're super popular. And then probably a Sealy hat could be thrown in there, or an Nike ACG hat on top. And it's kind of this silhouette of looking like you're ready to go into the outdoors, or your lifestyle is an extension of what you like to do. So it's outdoor chic, you can also kind of classify it as, but it's huge. The first trend, it came from Japan, I think, and then it went into Paris and London, and came to the US. And all the brands we know and love are playing in this space now. It's pretty fun to watch.
It's so fascinating. It makes me want to just add an anecdote that I heard on a podcast recently with a guy who worked on the Nike ACG brand. And for those who are unfamiliar, ACG was Nike's foray into the outdoor category. This is probably back in the 90s. And he was talking about sort of the trouble that they were having in figuring out the brand's place in outdoor. And this guy who was working at a branding agency identified it's the swoosh that's the problem, because it signifies victory and it signifies super high performance, and that's all that matters, right? But in outdoor, that's not it. It's about the feeling, it's about the vibe. And so they fixed up the ACG logo and ended up making a lot of iconic products. Anyway.
So hip.
Yeah, so hip. Speaking of hip, let's talk about pop culture stuff as we move towards talking, specifically addressing Riley's comment here. Recently in the Super Bowl, Rihanna was rocking a pair of Salomons on stage. Mike, you were mentioning that you worked on that platform back in your Salomon days. Maybe just talk a little bit about that Gorp Core moment and what that means for a brand when you have that type of exposure on that stage.
Yes, this is where the worlds really collide. So at Salomon, I was working on the performance trail running stuff, and the sports style and lifestyle team, they sat right across the office from me, and a lot of times they would want to see what we're working on, and then they would take it and then put it into a really iconic fashion type development process. And so the Rihanna shoe, the bottom half of the shoe is a performance shoe. It's a cross, speed cross inspired bottom unit. So the whole bottom of the shoe is rooted in one of the most iconic, trail running shoes there is. And then, the upper is this kind of crazy gator and lifestyle stuff. So, it's interesting. I wasn't necessarily working on the lifestyle product, but what was coming in performance just kind of fed right into the other side of it. And it's pretty cool if you look at a lot of the shoes, they all have these really high performance elements to them, but then little twists with color blocking or materials or gaiters and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really great example of these worlds coming together and kind of living harmoniously. I think everyone was a little bit scared of like going into fashion, or even, trail runners I would hear on the trail, like, oh, but they're just like a fashion brand, or, they're not authentic and stuff. But now we're seeing that we can all get along, and, we all win if everyone's, inspired by the outdoors. So you can take that however you want, but I think it's super cool.
So cool. So Corinne, maybe we'll tee you up with Riley's question, and just to restate it here for the audience, let me find it here. Riley says, do you see any tension between trail running as a quote activewear category and trail running as a sport? Growth in one aspect is not mutually exclusive with growth in the other, but I am curious.
Yeah, I don't know that I have all the answers on this one as far as like, being an athlete in the mix, or being someone who's working on the media side of things in the mix there. I do think that more eyes on like this sector, this niche, quote unquote niche sport, the better. More eyes means more dollars, which generally speaking does have a trickle down effect. Obviously, not all of it comes down to the athletes or to the media, etc. But I do think that greater exposure to a wider population base grows the sport, grows people connecting with the outdoors, as Mike just mentioned. I think that's huge, right? Like, it can be really easy. I remember having this discussion with someone, I think it was like during the pandemic, when like our trailheads were closed in San Francisco. Like, you weren't supposed to drive to a trailhead. And someone, was like, oh, like, it's just the people from the city ruining this from all of us. And I was like, no, like, you're not you're not stuck in traffic. You are traffic, right? Like, and getting to the point where you're like, oh, well, they just want to be out here enjoying and experiencing the same things that I enjoy and experience, the same hardship of like living in any mountain town, right? Where it's like, you can get pissed that everyone and their mom is moving to Bozeman, Montana, but like, you also live in Bozeman, Montana. Like, it's like, you can't be upset that people want the same things that you want. And so I think that like that tension, right? And I think that tension speaks more to the authenticity question of the like Zara is dropping like a line of running and trail running apparel, I believe. And they're like a fast fashion house. And like, okay, so is the tension there the authenticity piece of the puzzle? And like, does it like what matters to us? Is it the fast fashion piece? And we would want we as a community value sustainability and environmental impacts. Therefore, we expect X, Y, and Z in our apparel and footwear. Like, so I think the tension there is oftentimes authenticity in my mind. Obviously, you could like take this question any matter of directions, but to me, like, that's where my brain goes, is that tension in a lot of this space is about authenticity, but we all gain from greater exposure of our sport to a wider audience.
This is great. So Mike, let me tee you up with this, because I think what Corinne is getting at, and that all brands want to achieve, because human beings are signaling social creatures, right? When you go to the coffee shop and you see somebody in a Freetrail hoodie, that's a trail person. Same with somebody who's rocking a normal hat, like, that's a trail runner right there. You see somebody rocking Zara's new trail running capsule at the coffee shop, you have no idea if that person is like sort of in that community. And I think brands in a lot of ways play that role in society of just like identifying
signaling
who are in the community that you belong to. And I think Normal is a great example of this, because you guys have made trail running your core differentiator, your core wedge to be a brand. Like, you're not trying to play in the road space. Any comments there on sort of mixing culture, community, and
identity, identity?
Yeah, I think, I really like, what you said about if you see someone in the coffee shop and, if they have a Freetrail hoodie or a normal hat, then that's a great, signal and representation and a way for them to express themselves. I think we've seen it in surfing and skateboarding as well over time, where it's a way for people to, kind of communicate about themselves and what they like to do and who they are. At Normal, I think one thing that's really, really important for us is to stay true to who we are and who we are to the sport. And, one thing I think that's interesting about that too is, being true to our sport also means we have to be true to the wild places that we like to be in and to our planet, right? Like, that's a cool thing about the brand Normal. I know, like, why I'm proud to wear this hat and talk to you on this podcast is that it's a brand that really reflects my values and who I am and what I really believe in. Like, I've been saying this for a long time to my friends in Chamonix, but it's like, we shouldn't be trail running in February and March. We shouldn't be trail running in December. Like that should be the campaign, right? Like no more trail running in these winter months. But the reality is the world's changing, the planet's changing, and I think it's all our collective responsibility to do something. But I really am proud that, by wearing this, this normal cap, that it signals that we're trying to do things, minimize the risk, minimize the errors and the impact on the environment. So yeah, I think it's, yeah.
Love it. So clumsy transition here, but we have to get to this before we sign off. It's something that Mike and I talked about the other day, and that is another Salomon product, the XT trail shoes. And I've got it up here on my computer. So I'm going to share my screen and ask Mike to just provide a little comment on the history of this product, where it's been, and the significance in the culture at this point.
Gosh, you know what? This is a crazy shoe. I'm a total shoe geek, so I can keep out this all the time. But if you have any real trail running crazy super fans, which I'm sure you do, find old pictures of Francois and Frosty and maybe Michel Lon, maybe, but go back in like the 2010, 2011, 2012 era, and you'll see them all with this, basically the bottom half of the shoe or this shoe. And what's super cool is this shoe was designed to win UTMB and to be like the premier trail running shoe in the Alps. And it was, this thing was unprecedented in what it could do, big lugs, chassis system, and, all of those things that made it this beast in the Alps, is what also made it a really, cool sneaker, to put it one way. So, it was kind of chunky, it was overbuilt, you could color block it a bunch of different ways. And so you have a shoe that was, designed to win UTMB, and then it ends up winning GQ Sneaker of the Year. And I think it goes back to that authenticity and performance, right? It was this kick-ass mountain racer shoe. And it's crazy because that bottom, Francois used that bottom of the shoe for a really long time with a different upper because it was such a beast. But it's really wild to see this shoe, come to life and be, worn by Bella Hadid and Rihanna on her birthday. I remember Rihanna on her birthday in 2018 had a pair on, and you know what I did? I went out and got myself a pair. I'm like, fine, I'll get myself a lifestyle pair. And it's cool. My buddy, who's the lawyer in Alaska right now, he's a public defender. He sent me a picture today. He's wearing a pair of XT6 in court, which is also just wild. But yeah, it's cool.
Personal.
Such swag.
But it's funny. It's amazing, right? It's the shoe that wins UTMB, then wins GQ sneaker of the year a decade later, and they make it in 18 different colorways now, and they're probably selling tons of these things. And it started in trail running, best sport ever. I want to close with a quote here that I pulled out of the article that I think encapsulates our whole conversation. But before I do that, do you guys have any closing thoughts that are top of mind that you want to leave our audience with before we sign off?
I think I've got one. I think, we've talked a lot about brands and sponsors and athletes moving around and this kind of hyper competitive nature of trail running. But, I work for Normal, you've got sponsors and Corinne's on Adidas. I think we all just want people to be outside and trail run. And I think, I don't care, if you want to wear a normal shoe, great. I'll give you a million reasons why you should. And I think they're great. But if you're going to go outside and run in Terrex or Salomon or Hoka, like awesome too. I think and that's one side of the business and of our sport that I ever want to change. I think just empowering people and giving people the tools they need to find love in the outdoors is the most important thing. And I think as long as our industries are rooted in that, and I think that's authenticity, I think that's performance, I think trail running will be around for a really long time and have a really positive impact. So lots of talks about brands and athletes moving around and making money, but I think we all just want people out there running trails.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day too, like for those of you who are listening or watching or however you're consuming this, goes to like, I think the young athlete or the person who wants to be sponsored. I myself have been in that position of like wanting this thing desperately, and recognizing after the fact that it really, at the end of the day, like what you think you're seeking is like external validation, and like what you really need to be seeking is like alignment with like your own authentic self. And like if a brand aligns with that, amazing, but you can't go to a brand for validation, because like the likelihood is that you're going to be super disappointed. So like kind of keep that in mind, like keep that authentic nature of whatever you want to do in mind, and like if the right thing comes along, it'll come along.
What a great place to end. So I just wanted to read a quick quote from the founder of Satisfy, another really interesting brand that we didn't get around to talking about, but whose founder I'm going to have on the podcast here very soon. His name's Bryce Partouche, is I think how you say the last name. I think he's French. But he says, trail culture is like skateboarding. Even when you're not out practicing the sport, people still want to display that they were part of the community by wearing trail shoes or technical clothing. And I think this gets back to what we were saying earlier, that it's just like any subculture, right? And that's one of the things that I think, I always find entertaining when I'm out in the world, is identifying the people who are clearly trail runners and then feeling that simpatico, that vibe of like, I understand you, you understand me, we're part of this community together. And brands often facilitate that connection between people. So it's fun to chat about it. And it's a super interesting time in the sport right now with so many interesting brands. So a big thank you to the MVP, Corinne Malcolm, for joining as usual. Big thank you to Mike Ambrose. A big thank you to everybody who is watching. Make sure you check out the description here. We've got, discount codes for our sponsors and stuff. This will obviously be like ad free, but we definitely encourage you to support brands that keep Freetrail in business. Join Freetrail Pro. I got to say that too. Oh, also subscribe to our YouTube channel, please. I'll be that guy. Please subscribe to the Freetrail YouTube channel. That would mean a lot to us. On behalf of Corinne and Mike, have a great